సరిగ్గా మన టైంకి మాట్లాడతాడు వాడు. ఆన్ చేసి ఉన్నారా? వాసుదేవ. హరి ఓం. శం నో మిత్రస్యం వరుణః శం నో భవత్వర్యమా శం న ఇంద్రో బృహస్పతిః శం నో విష్ణురుక్రమః నమో బ్రహ్మణే నమస్తే వాయో త్వమేవ ప్రత్యక్షం బ్రహ్మాసి త్వామేవ ప్రత్యక్షం బ్రహ్మ వదిష్యామి ఋతం వదిష్యామి సత్యం వదిష్యామి తన్మామవతు తద్వక్తారమవతు అవతు మాం అవతు వక్తారం. ఓం శాంతి శాంతి శాంతి. ప్రాచ్య దేశానాం సమన్వయ విధాయకం శాంతం సౌమ్య గుణోపేతం కృష్ణం వందే జగద్గురుం సర్వవేదార్థతత్వజ్ఞం వేదార్థప్రతిపాదకం పురాణసారసర్వజ్ఞం కృష్ణం వందే జగద్గురుం. ఓమస్మద్గురుభ్యో నమః. Welcome to all our friends, brothers and sisters. So we are here to continue the study of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So previously we have completed study of the 23rd aphorism, in which Patanjali has explained that we can attain that state which is required in a short time by a total surrender to the Ishvara or Lord, the indweller. So we have studied this with many examples. Now we enter into the study of next aphorism, Aphorism 24. So this aphorism 24, he is defining Ishvara. That means he is clearly explaining who is Ishvara. Previously we have studied that how to make a total surrender to the Lord or Ishvara. So before we try to make a total surrender, we have to precisely know who is this Ishvara or the Supreme Lord. So that is why in this aphorism he is now explaining us about who is Ishvara. So in this aphorism, क्लेश कर्म विपाकाशयैः अपरामृष्टः पुरुष विशेषः ईश्वरः. So here he says that the Lord of the bodies of all beings is the distinguished indweller who is never influenced or tackled by complications, deeds and their result. So any sort of complications, and complications means complications in our human life, any sort of complications and any sort of bondage of karma and its result, and also the motives about that. All these things cannot influence, or otherwise the one who is not influenced or touched by any of these, that Purusha is called Ishvara. So in a total surrender to the Lord, the indweller, that is described as the main attitude to be practiced by the follower of yoga. This was explained and described in the previous aphorism. So now he is defining Ishvara. So unless we know precisely who is Ishvara, we cannot make an effort to make a total surrender to Ishvara. To whom we have to surrender? If we don't know somebody, how can we surrender ourselves to some unknown person? We cannot do that, When we don't know anything about the other person, how can we make ourselves total a surrender of ourselves, everything to him? First of all, we have to know, we have to get familiar with him, we have to gain confidence in him, and then we can make an effort to surrender totally to him. So that is why in this aphorism he is defining, he is explaining more clearly who is Ishvara, where is he. So the human being, what we call a human being, is the human consciousness. We are human being is human consciousness. So, human consciousness, a being means not merely some lifeless substance. Human being is not any lifeless substance. So what are we? What is this body? Of course, it is made up of matter, but it is not just some lifeless object. Our body is it is an objective world, that's true, but it is having some life force. So it is made of consciousness. What we call matter, it is not an ultimate state. It appears. Before we enter into yogic way of observation, it appears that the body is ultimate, but that is not true. If it is ultimate, it should be there always. It's so simple. If our existence as our physical body is ultimate, then we should be here all the time. There should be nothing like death. But it is not happening. Everyone who takes a body, a form, one day or other he has to leave it. He cannot deny that. So it itself proves that this is not the ultimate. So what is ultimate in this? It is consciousness. Consciousness is ever existing. Consciousness is the content in the akasha, in the space. Space is conscious. So the consciousness of space is eternal. It is always there. So on the surface of that, on the background of that, on the surface of that, the human consciousness is floating on that. So our human body, what we see as a physical frame or body or form, is also, we call it material or matter. But what is matter? Matter is also a state of consciousness only. It is one state. So it is not ultimate. Just like how we see some blocks of ice floating on water, each of this block of ice, it is just floating on the water and it is in a solid state. That is true. The block of ice is in solid state, floating on water which is in liquid state. So these two are different by state. But it is floating there, but it is not ultimate. It cannot be always like it cannot stay as a block of ice. Afterwards, it will melt and it will just be merged in the water on which it is floating. That's all. Exactly in the same manner, the consciousness of space which we are going to now study more clearly, that is ultimate when compared to human consciousness. So human consciousness is only floating on the background of all consciousness. You have human consciousness, you are having animal consciousness, you are having plant consciousness, plant kingdom. Mineral kingdom has its own consciousness, atoms, their consciousness in the atom. Every atom has its level of consciousness. But all these things are floating on the all consciousness. So, within the man, within the human frame, we call this a body. Within this is a human frame. You call it a human frame, a human body. So within this body, we have the human consciousness, which is called the individual consciousness. And also there is all consciousness. It is also there in this. What is this all consciousness? This is the consciousness which exists everywhere, in every atom, in every body, not only in your body or my body, in every body and in everybody, every body and everybody. It is existing. That is all consciousness, universal consciousness. That is also there in us. And also we have our individual consciousness. So this individual consciousness is like the block of ice. This all consciousness is like water in this example. So this individual consciousness or human consciousness is floating on the all consciousness which is there in us. But this all consciousness is everywhere. That is why we call it all consciousness. Universal consciousness or all consciousness is there everywhere. It is there full in the space. So therefore it is there in every being, every atom, everywhere. So that it is also there in us, in our body. So in our body we have two components. One is all consciousness and one is human consciousness. They appear as two components, but the fact is, it is only the all consciousness which is existing, but for temporarily a part of it has changed its state in the form of human consciousness, just like how a part of water just got solidified and condensed to form the block of ice floating on it for a temporary time. Exactly it is same. This is how you have to understand. So all consciousness and human consciousness. So all consciousness exists in man as it exists everywhere. Because it exists everywhere, so also it is existing in us. It is common. All consciousness is common in every being, in you, in me, in everybody who is sitting there, who is sitting here, and in all the beings around us, birds, animals, plants. So it is all consciousness which exists everywhere, so it is also existing in us. It exists everywhere. Another, more to understand more clearly, we have another example which we know very well. Space. We are sitting in a room or in a hall, So there is a space inside the room, inside the hall. So inside the hall there is space, and this space inside the hall, which we call a hall, we named it as a hall. For example, a conference hall, maybe. Suppose we are all sitting in a hall for a conference. So that is we call conference hall. Okay? So we have space in the conference hall. But we have the space around the hall also. But the space in the conference hall is there only since the hall is built in the space. Before the hall is built, it is only the space, which is always there everywhere. After we have built the hall, then there is space inside which is called the hall, conference hall. Now you can understand. So this, what you call this hall, the space, is not different from the space around. It is a part of that only, but it is only floating on it. So this is how we have to understand the human consciousness is existing just temporarily in a different state than the all consciousness, which is also existing inside the human body as well as around the human body. So this must be very clear. No confusion in this. Then we can understand this aphorism. Then we can understand who is Ishvara. So the construction of a room is the beginning of the existence of the space in the room, in the hall. The construction of the hall is the beginning of the existence of space inside the hall. Before we have constructed the hall, also there is space there at the same place. It is not devoid of space. There is there is absolutely no vacant part anywhere in the space. The whole space is there and full of consciousness. This we have to always remember. What is there in the space? Consciousness, which is all consciousness. So when we started to build the hall, that is the starting point of the existence of the space inside the hall. As long as the hall structure is there, the space inside the hall exists there, which is part of the all pervading space. So originally the room is built in the hall is built in the space, but it appears that this space is there in the room. When we enter into a hall, then we feel, oh, there is much space inside the hall. Yes. This is simply because the hall is built in the space. That is the reason. But we don't remember that always. We always see inside the hall, we entered the hall, oh, very spacious. This hall, we have much space in the hall. But we call it hall only. We say there is much space in the hall, but we call it a hall, a conference hall, a prayer hall, whatever it may be. We see the space inside the hall, but since when? Since it is built Where it is built, the hall is built in the space. So this relationship between the space in the hall and space around the hall, this is the relationship between the all consciousness and human consciousness. Now it should be very clear. Same is the case with human consciousness in us. The birth of a human being is the beginning of the human consciousness in him. Just like how the construction of the hall is the beginning of space in the hall, in the same manner, the birth of a human being is the beginning of or the starting point of the human consciousness. That is the starting point for the human consciousness from the birth of the human being. So air and space, now you see, wonderful, still more clearly we can understand. Little children, they are playing. So what they do, they take some soap water, some water in which some soap is dissolved, because it brings foam. When the soap is dissolved in the water, it creates foam little bit. So the children are very much delighted by this. They bring some small tube and they dip it in this soap water and then blow it, then you get bubbles. You know this. For fun, children, or even we also do that sometimes along with children when we are playing. What we do? We dip this plastic tube into the water and take it out and blow it, then we get bubbles, and each bubble keeps floating in the air for some time and then bursts out and finished. There is no bubble anymore. This you know, very familiar everywhere. So now this air, so what is there? Now tell me, what is there in a bubble? When you have blown it, this soap water, you get a bubble. What is there in the bubble? What is there in the bubble? There is space and air and nothing else. Space with some air is the content of this bubble, water bubble. Then, what is there around this bubble? Just try to understand. It's not difficult. Inside the bubble there is space and air and nothing else. Around the bubble also there is space filled with air. The same thing. Inside the bubble, space with some air. Outside and around the bubble also space with some air. So, this is very clear. But the shape of the bubble, how is it maintained for some time while it is floating in the air? Tell me. How is it floating? How the bubble, which is created by blowing out, this bubble, it is floating, which is causing fun for the children. That is why they do this. So, what is the factor that makes the bubble float for some time? It is the tension of this air inside the space in the bubble. Because within the bubble the air is bound. Space is not bound. This we have to remember. Space is never, of course it is called space inside the bubble. Okay. So this air which is there inside has a tension. But this same air and space is existing around the bubble, there is no tension. Even though exactly it is the same, the only subtle difference is the inside the bubble, within the space inside the bubble, the air is with tension. That is why the shape of the bubble is carried for some time. If there is no tension, there cannot be a bubble. This you see. So, this bubble, due to this tension, the shape of the bubble is floating. The shape is there maintained and the bubble is floating. So what is the difference between the air inside the bubble and air outside the bubble is, inside the bubble the air is undergoing some tension. Tension means air always tries to move here and there. Therefore, surface tension it is called. But air outside, it is not bound by any surface. So there is no tension. You understand? Outside, the air outside in the space has no tension because it is free outside, no limitation. But inside the bubble it has limitation, therefore it has tension. But it is the same. So, air and space exist in a soap bubble under tension. The same air and space exist outside without any tension. Similarly, the consciousness exists in a human being as human consciousness under tension. Now you compare the human being like a bubble. Why should you compare the human body with the bubble? Because our body is also floating like a bubble in the space. Where are we? We are in the space only. Just like how the bubble is floating, our body is also floating. Since the body is formed, the body is formed inside the womb of the mother by the process and came out. So after coming out, our body has its own shape, like the bubble. Bubble has its own shape, round. And our body has its own shape with all these limbs and all this head, limbs, all this structure. It has its own shape. So just like the bubble, it is floating. So in this human consciousness, so human body is like a bubble. Inside the bubble, just like the space, there is consciousness. And this consciousness is the human consciousness inside the body of the human being, which is under tension. So, what are the factors that cause the tension in the human consciousness. What are the conditions? The conditions created by the human mind and situations and complications. You know, when we are born, there is no complication. Maybe there is complication in the mind of the parents, or maybe, but in the child, there is no mind of the child, there is no complication. How can you say that there is no complication? Until that time that the child starts growing and imitating the parents, the mind of the child has no complication. Until certain time. How can you say that? Just observe the child. When the child is hungry, the child makes noise, cries. When the mother gives the milk, so hunger is satiated. The child bears no impression about that. When hungry, he cries. When not hungry, the child keeps playing. So what if something is needed for the body, then the child will indicate through gestures and by making noise. Because the child is not yet able to speak out, so makes some gestures, physical gestures and expressions. The child has expressions, but now impressions about any person. That makes the difference between the child and the adults. So just like that, we have, when we started to grow into adults, this growth is not just a physical growth, it is also mental growth. So our mind is growing, body is growing. Body is growing according to the natural laws. Mind is also growing, but when the mind is growing, then the complications will start in the mind. The mind starts making complications. What are the complications? He starts liking somebody, he starts disliking somebody, liking some objects or some things, dislike some things. So all these various things, and feels comfortable, uncomfortable from the different conditions. So all these things, they start. Where they start? They start in the mind, not in the body. Whether you feel comfortable or uncomfortable, does it belong to body or mind? We generally think that it is the body. No. It is the mind. We have to observe it ourselves. Generally we take it for granted that comfort or discomfort belongs to body. No, no, no. How is that? Suppose you are lying down on a bed, you want to sleep or take rest. Then, if the bed is hard or smooth, if it is in a good place, if it is having some situations comfortable or not comfortable. So whether you feel comfortable or comfortable, this feeling is of the mind, not the body. Generally we think it is the body. If we have, it is soft or hard to the body, The bed may be felt as soft or felt as hard by the mind, not by the body. So comfort or discomfort belong to the mind, not the body. So the difference, that is the difference, under tension, the same air and space outside without any tension. Similarly, same consciousness exists in human being as human consciousness under tension of his own conditions, situations and complications. Within the same consciousness there is Lord consciousness also is there. Without Lord consciousness, human consciousness or individual consciousness cannot exist at all. Because consciousness is all consciousness, which is called Lord consciousness. A part of it became human consciousness because it is within the human body. That is the reason. But even then, the human consciousness is only a part of all consciousness or Lord consciousness. But this Lord consciousness is not affected by any of these things. This is the very important point for understanding this. So once again, you take the example of our human body. So in our human body there is existing the human consciousness, there is existence of the Lord consciousness. So this human consciousness is part of the Lord consciousness, but just like the block of ice, it is just in a different state. Therefore, it is under tension, like the air in the bubble. And the tension is because of its so many types of conditions and situations and complications, all these things. That we know in our life, every one of us. The only person who doesn't feel tension is the person who has completely surrendered his human consciousness to the Lord consciousness inside himself. That is what is explained in the previous aphorism, total surrender to the Lord consciousness or Ishvara. Surrender what? I have to what I am. We have studied this previous aphorism. So only that human being, in that person, his human consciousness is not at all undergoing any such experience like complications and all these things, only when it is totally surrendered to the Lord consciousness, in which it is a part. That is our aim also, total surrender. That is what we are trying to study and trying to implement it. So within the same consciousness there is Lord consciousness which is not affected by anything. Lord consciousness is not at all affected by any of these things. Suppose I feel angry about somebody. Who is that fellow who is feeling this anger? He is the human consciousness, but not the Lord consciousness who is also there inside. Lord consciousness, he has nothing, no effect at all, completely neutral. It is only this human consciousness which feels all these things. Because it is conditioned. This we have to remember. Even though it is the same universal consciousness or Lord consciousness, but since it has taken a form, since then It is subjected to all these conditions and affected by these conditions. But at the same time, the Lord consciousness, which is also existing along with the human consciousness, is not at all affected by any of these things. Psychological situations cannot affect him. Him means Lord consciousness. He is not conditioned to do anything since he is not bound by the previous deeds. You know, we have known now, we have discussed that the human consciousness is conditioned. Why it is conditioned? Why should the human consciousness be conditioned? Because of the results of the deeds done in the previous existence. That is the reason. You know, in every life, human life, every time we do certain things, we cannot keep without doing. That is impossible. That is also explained by the Lord in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. You cannot keep yourself without doing something else. It's not possible for any being to keep without doing anything. If you say that I can close my eyes, I can bind my limbs and sit down without moving for hours together, okay, you can sit down or lie down, whatever it may be. But you cannot be without doing something. How can it? I am not doing anything. I am lying down. Okay, you are lying down. But are you not making inhalation and exhalation? What about that? Are you doing it or not? And are you not thinking about something else? Honestly tell. We have to tell us ourselves. We are thinking, we cannot be without thinking something else. So then how can you say that I am not doing anything? That is what very clearly Lord said to Arjuna, don't deceive yourself by saying that you can be in action without any action. Not possible. Don't aspire for that. That is what the Lord said to Arjuna. So, the psychological situations belong to human consciousness, not to Lord consciousness. So, the Lord consciousness will be like an onlooker in us. The Lord consciousness, which is there existing inside the human consciousness, is only an onlooker. He is not affected by any of these things. He will be just like a spectator. You know, when we watch at a movie on the screen, so many things are happening in the movie between the actors, between the characters. But the one who is the spectator, we will be looking at it. What will we do? You cannot go to the screen and stop. Suppose two fellows are fighting with each other in the picture projected on the screen. We keep looking at it, those fellows are fighting. You may feel emotional, but you cannot stop them fighting because it is only a picture projected. In the same manner, your human consciousness, while it is undergoing all these tensions, the Lord consciousness who is existing along with human consciousness is not affected by any of these things. This we have to know very clearly. To know it more precisely, we have also one more example very clearly. We have to take many examples for this because it must be very clear in understanding this. Suppose you have some clay before you And you have seen, you have made a pot out of the clay. With the clay, you can make a pot, a big pot, a small pot. You can make a lid of the pot. You can make a plate with the clay. You can make so many things. So, the clay is, there are two things. Suppose you made a pot. In the pot there are two things. One is the pot and the clay. Always together. You cannot have a pot without clay. Can you? Because the pot is made from the clay. So you cannot separate the pot from the clay. Inseparable. In the same manner, human consciousness and Lord consciousness are inseparable, because human consciousness is also made of Lord consciousness only. But the pot has certain conditions. The pot may break, but clay will not break. We have to accept this fact. You can make an experiment and verify. If you break the pot, can you break the clay? Even though they are together, but clay cannot be broken by anybody. Clay is the clay only. Always it will be clay. So it is not conditioned or obliged to receive the results of any deeds. So this is because the pot is only a name of the shape given. That is the reason. Pot, what you call pot, is only a name for a particular shape which is brought out from the clay. That is why clay is not affected, but pot is affected. The shape is affected. The same thing with our human body also. It is like a pot. So the Lord consciousness is not affected, just like the clay is not affected in the pot. So Lord consciousness is not conditioned by the individual karma. Its results are the complications of psychological web. You know, all the complications in the human being are because of the psychological factor in us. It is like a web, you know. So human consciousness is conditioned and affected by all these psychological web and psychological factors, whereas the Lord consciousness is not at all affected by any of these psychological factors. So even when the Lord consciousness is not affected, but even when the Lord consciousness keeps staying along with the human consciousness. You see, the Lord consciousness is existing, staying along with the human consciousness in the human body, even when the Lord consciousness is not at all affected by any of these conditions. Why human consciousness is getting affected is because of the effect of the karma, previous karma. Karma means deed. What he has done before. Suppose I have taken a loan from a bank. This is my karma. This is an example. So I am obliged to repay the loan along with the interest. I am obliged to do that. But the Lord consciousness in me is not at all obliged by any of things, because the loan taken is not by the Lord consciousness. The loan is taken by the human consciousness. You understand? So all these sorts of relationships which a human being has in his life, they belong to human consciousness but not to Lord consciousness, because Lord consciousness is always the same Lord, universal consciousness which is existing in everybody. It's the same exactly, not different. This we have to understand. Suppose I am here and my wife is also there. So I call her my wife. It's a relationship I have with my wife. This is only on the level of the human consciousness. But the Lord consciousness in me or in my wife has nothing like this as a husband and wife. Because for Lord consciousness there is no emotional exchanges, or there is no emotional relationship. But for the human consciousness all these things are there. Like and dislike, all these emotional aberrations are there for the human consciousness. But even then the Lord consciousness is coexisting with the human consciousness. Now you can understand. Now we start to understand what is our human life. Even though the consciousness is not our own property, it is not ours, it belongs to Lord only, but even then a part of it, since we are born, this is bound by the bondage of karma. So we have to very clearly understand all these things. We have to analyze, understand these things. It is all synthesis, but within this we are making analysis. But finally synthesis is the Lord. So the Lord consciousness is not controlled by the karma or the result of it or any complications of psychological web. It lives in the body. Lord consciousness is also there living with us in the body in obedience with his own law. This is another very important subtle point. The Lord consciousness is living along with the human consciousness in us, but the Lord consciousness is living obediently towards the law, cosmic law. But who made this law? The Lord only. Law is not different from the Lord. But even then, this Lord consciousness is existing in obedience to the law made by him only. This is a bit difficult to accept or understand in the beginning. Suppose you see there is an educational institution, a school or a college. So the chief of this is called the principal. Who makes the timetable for the classes? It is the principal who finally approves, makes the timetable for the academic year. It is the principal who has to make it. So he makes the timetable for the teachers who are working under him. So you have to teach this subject at this time, like that. And in the timetable he includes himself also, because he is also a teacher. Being the principal, he is also basically a teacher. So he also includes his name in the timetable. when he teaches the class to the students. Now, so he is the principal who made this timetable, but even then he obeys this, and he never, because he is the principal, he will never say that because I made this timetable, I will not follow this. No, he cannot do that. He will not do that. He will strictly follow, even though it is made by him. The same manner, the Lord of the universe, he made the law, universal law or cosmic law, but he also follows that law. So the Lord of the Lord consciousness or universal consciousness, who is existing along with the human consciousness in the human constitution, that Lord consciousness always goes according to the cosmic law, whereas the human consciousness has always a tendency to go against the law or not following the law. That is why he is bound by the karma, by the result of his deeds. That is the reason. You see? So far we have not thought of all these things, therefore we are not familiar to this. But now we have to start to understand about Lord consciousness and human consciousness. Because both are existing together in every being. No being is exception for this. Every being, in every being, the individual consciousness, it may be human consciousness or it may be animal consciousness, whatever it may be, but always Lord consciousness and this consciousness together they are existing when they are within the form, within the frame. But at the same time, the individual consciousness or human consciousness is bound. It is under bondage. It is bound by the karma due to the deeds and psychological aspects. Whereas the Lord consciousness is not at all affected, not bound by any of these things. See how wonderful it is. You cannot bind the Lord with our deeds. The human being always tries to involve the Lord also into our karma, but never it can happen. Human fellow tries to use his intelligence to involve the Lord also into his karma, but never, not the Lord who is the indweller in him is never involved in the karma of this fellow. It is very interesting. It is not, it is, people think that it is a mystic, there is no mystery. It is a fact. It is a fact which we can verify ourselves. All these things you can verify, everybody can verify with his own body, with his own life. That is the advantage in study of this science. Whatever is explained in this science can be verified by every person with himself only. You need not verify it with others. Everybody can verify it, whether it is correct or not, you can verify with yourself, with your own self, with your own body, with your own incidents, with your own mind. You have to verify this. So you cannot escape. The obedience is not conditioning but compassion to honor the law. This is also another thing. Why the Lord consciousness is existing obediently towards this law while existing in us? This is not by binding, he is not bound, but by compassion, to honor the law. Because if the Lord will not honor the law, immediately what we do, we follow his example and we always dishonor the law. That is what exactly the Lord explained to Arjuna. The Lord said, my dear fellow Arjuna, in all the creation I have no obligation to do anything. The Lord is not obliged to do anything. You cannot question the Lord. Why you have done this? Why you have not done this? Can anybody question him? Why you have created me? You have no question to ask him. The Lord who has created us. Why you have created me like this? There is no question. The Lord need not answer your question because, yes, it is will, it is the cosmic will. You have no question. So that is why the Lord said, if I am not obliged, but I am not obliged to do anything, even then I always keep doing my lot towards the creation. Why? Also he said, if I stop doing my lot, then you fellows will take this example, my example, and stop doing your duties. You see, it's a fact, it's a truth, which Lord has explained so clearly to us. For example, when there is an organization, a spiritual organization or maybe a commercial organization, whatever it may be, but the chief of the organization has all the powers. He is not obliged. He has absolute freedom to do anything, to take any decision. He is free because he is the chief, total boss, chief. Suppose he does not attend the office on time, also nobody can question him. But he is always on time if he is a good boss. If he is really a good boss, a really honest fellow, he will not break the rules which he had made for the organization. Because if he happens to break the rule, then all these fellows will take his example to break the law always. Rules. They will break the rules always because they say they take his example. That is why the Lord said to Arjuna, even though I am not obliged to do anything, I am not bound by anything else in this creation, I keep doing my lot because all of you will take my example. That is why I will not break my own law. That is what the Lord said. So the Lord consciousness will never break the law like the human consciousness. Human consciousness will always be breaking the law, falling out. And that is why he has to undergo the result of it. So he is the Lord of the Constitution and he exists in obedience with his own law, who is existing in us. So the human consciousness finds it as his own conditioning, while the Lord consciousness finds it as his own play. That is the difference. Human fellow may feel that, oh, I am conditioned. When the human fellow is asked to follow the law or be obedient to the law, then he feels, oh, I am conditioned, I am on pressure. But the Lord consciousness is also following the law, not by pressure, just like a play. That is what the Lord says, you also can be like me, take it like a play. Take your life like a play like me, that is what the Lord says. For that only He comes into form to show us how to live. You see, this is the reason why He manifests Himself into form again and again into the physical plane. Just how many times He came down to earth to show us, the human fellows, that we can also live like that without bondage, without conditioning. That is possible for us also. That is to teach this, He comes down and He moves along with us. So all these, so many great saints are just forms of the Lord. What all these saints are doing, they are moving along with us. But unfortunately, when they move with us, then we will not care for them. We say, oh, they are also like us. They are moving with us to make an example and to elevate us and to bring us out from the bondage. But unfortunately, when they move along with us, we also think about them as just normal human beings like us. They won't make any special thing. They appear like normal human beings only. Many of the saints, they live just simply. But we human fellows, we have no simplicity. That is the very funny thing. So we don't care for them. In the same manner, the human consciousness, who is existing along with us, along with the Lord consciousness, who is existing along with the human consciousness, the same manner. So that is what we have to understand. The human being is therefore expected to meditate upon the Lord consciousness within himself and make a total surrender of his ownership and the results of his own deeds. This is the actual point where we have to reach. What we have to do in the path of yoga is meditate upon this Lord consciousness which is there in us along with our human consciousness, and try to surrender our human consciousness totally to that Lord consciousness. We have to surrender our deeds, our motives, all these things to the Lord consciousness in us. Results of deeds also we have to surrender totally. This is very difficult. We do so many things for the results. We have to accept this. That is why we are always bound and conditioned. What for we are doing so many things? What is our motive in doing this? Is for the result. Our mind is attached to the result of the work what we are doing. That is why we are always bound. That is the reason for bondage. We are binding ourselves, nobody is binding us. Nature does not bind us. Our individual nature binds us. Our behavior, our thinking. This is why we are bound. Because we do not leave the result to the Lord consciousness. That is where we are failing. We want to control the result. We want to control, we want to do many things which do we as we like, and we want to control the result of it. That is how the funny it is. This is what is happening. We do many things along with according to our like or dislike from us. When you do anything, you have the result, which is inevitable. You have to undergo the result if you want or not. But the human fellow, he wants to do many things according to his like or dislike, and he wants to control the result. If the result is according to his expectation, he wants it. If the result is against his expectation, he wants to avoid it. But unfortunately for him, the result is not under his control. The result is in the control of nature. So he has to understand that the result of his deed is not under his control, always in the control of nature. Therefore, he has to himself adjust and surrender to the Lord consciousness. That is what is explained in this aphorism. So the Lord consciousness, Ishvara Pranidhana, a total surrender to the Lord consciousness. So that is what is explained in this total surrender to the Lord consciousness. So in this aphorism, all the complications are all these complications in human life will never affect the Purusha Vishesha. In this aphorism, he said Purusha Vishesha. Purusha Vishesha means, so Purusha means the person here. Purusha Vishesha means the Lord. Purusha Vishesha is the distinguished indweller. Purusha means the indweller. Purusha Vishesha means the distinguished indweller, who is the Lord in us. So these are they are not affected. He is not affected by this. So this example which we have to remember is, when there are many blocks of ice floating on the surface of water, all these blocks will exist separately. These blocks cannot come together to form into one block, because they are different blocks. But when all these blocks are dissolved, then it will be only one water. There are no different waters. You see, very simple example to show, to explain us the individual consciousness and Lord consciousness. Individual consciousness is like the blocks of ice floating on the water, just like all the human beings are floating on the surface of Ishvara. So as long as our human consciousness is existing separately, we are like the blocks of ice. But when we surrender ourselves to the Lord consciousness, that means it is like all these blocks of ice get dissolved. When they get dissolved, all of them become one water only. Water is only one. This is wonderful example which if we remember, you can clearly understand what is Ishvara and what is individual. There is no difference, there is no difficulty in understanding. If you make it complicated, then it is difficult, but it is so simple. Patanjali has given in a very simple manner, and the saints like our master explained this in a very simple manner. The thing is, unless you apply to yourself, you cannot understand this. That is the secret. If you will not apply it to yourself, all these things will be very abstract and difficult to understand. See? If I explain you about Ishvara without relating it to every one of us, even though if I speak about Ishvara for hours or days together, you cannot understand anything, it gets more complicated. You have to relate everything, all of these things, to yourself. That is the secret of this, to understand this very clearly. So, when there are many blocks of ice floating on the water, the content in water and the content in block of ice is the same. There is no difference in the content. So we know this. But as long as it is existing as block of ice, it has temporarily a different property. First of all, it is in a solid state. That is the first thing. So when it is in solid state, it has shape, it has volume, it has weight. All these properties are there as long as it is in solid state. You know, when the water, suppose you take a cup of water and put it in the freezer, very shortly it becomes ice, block of ice. So when it is formed into a block of ice, until again it is dissolved into water, before that it has a different property than water. So these different properties, these properties which are different to the original state, this is called Prakriti or nature. Technically it is called Prakriti or nature. So the one who is the essence, that means the water in all these blocks of ice, the essence is the water only, and that is called Purusha. So what is explained here in this aphorism is that all these difficulties, they will not affect Ishvara or Purusha, they will affect only these individuals. One block of ice may be very big size, one block of ice may be smaller size, one block of ice may be its shape may not be a perfect shape, one block of ice may be perfectly in a shape of a cube. So like this, all these differences are there. But all these different properties or different subjects, all the differences, they will not affect the essence which is water. You understand this very clearly. So the essence is water. In the same manner, we are all so many human beings. We are all like the block of ice. So all the human beings, we are speaking of the human beings, there are all other beings also, but we are now, for the time being, we speak of ourselves, human beings. So we are all like these different blocks of ice, having different characters, different qualities because of difference in our, just like the difference in the volume and weight of these blocks of ice, difference in our existences, we have all the differences. But all these differences will not affect the one indweller in all of us. That is what is exactly meant in this aphorism. This aphorism we have to study more and more deeply with many more examples, then only we can understand this aphorism. Otherwise we cannot. Because this aphorism, he is explaining what is Ishvara, what is the indweller, what is the Lord, what is meant by the Lord, how we can know Him, how we can experience Him. That is being explained in this aphorism. So to explain this, he is also explaining about who are we, what is our individual consciousness, what are our bodies. All the bodies of all the beings are made up of the same consciousness. Just like all the blocks of ice are made up of the same water. We have to always correlate with this example, otherwise we will lose. We are lost if we will not correlate with these examples. Take these examples always. Block of ice and water, and clay and the pot. Since ancient times, the teachers, the rishis who teach us this subject, they have given these two examples as the best examples for us to understand the relationship between ice and water and vapor, of course, afterwards. But mostly because the block of ice floats on the water, this is the best example. And another example is clay and the pot. So this is the relationship. From this example we know the relationship between the indweller and the individual. We are all individuals which have different characters, different forms and all this difference. But the indweller is not different like the clay in all the pots. We are all like pots, made up of the clay of the Lord consciousness. The Lord consciousness is the clay, we are all pots in that. We have to remember this, we should not forget this. Then we can understand what he is explaining in his aphorism. So the indweller is called the Purusha. So he is not at all affected by any of these things which belong to the individuals. For example, Master has given wonderful example which we can never forget in our life. In explaining this aphorism, Master gives now several examples. Suppose we are there, we are sweating, our sweat produces some smell. That is why we keep on spraying all the body lotions and all these things, so that the smell of our sweat, we can avoid this. For that only many people will use this. So the smell which is not comfortable, which comes out of our own sweat from our own body, we have to accept this fact. You can't make other persons responsible. You keep yourself alone in your room. Observe yourself while you are sweating. Sweat comes from your own body. After some time your sweat started to give some smell which is not so comfortable for yourself, for your nose. You have to accept this. Now, the space where you are standing, where you are staying now, the space which is there around you and the space in you, this space is not affected at all by the smell which you are affected. This is the fact. So Ishvara in us, the Lord in us, is like the space. He is not affected by any of these things of us. Either the assets or liabilities what we have in our life, the Ishvara, the Lord, is not affected by any of this. Suppose we have taken a loan and we have not paid back, so we are caught by the law, by the court. So we are put in the jail, for example, in the prison. Even then, the Lord in us is not imprisoned. Mind that. This fellow is imprisoned. The human fellow is imprisoned, but the Lord, who is like a space inside and outside, is not imprisoned at all. You cannot imprison the Lord. You cannot imprison the space. Even in the prison also there is space. Even outside and around the prison also there is space, which is not at all affected by anything. So Lord consciousness is like the space. So Ishvara is there in every one of us like that, but he is not at all affected by any of these things, conditions. We are affected by that. Why? What is the difference? Is because of our deeds, what we do. Now we have to come to that point. All the deeds are of two types. The deeds that bind you, the deeds that will not affect you. These are only two classes. The deeds are classified into two classes. The deeds that bind you and affect you, the deeds that do not bind you and affect you. Which are the deeds that bind you? The deeds that you want to do for yourself exclusively will bind you. You are responsible for that. The deeds which you will do, which belong to nature, they will not bind you at all. This is the secret of it. We have to meditate upon this. That is exactly what Lord has explained to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. As long as you keep on doing all the things with a motive to your personal deeds, all the personal life, the more you have personal life and personal deeds, the more you have its consequences which bind you. Cannot easily understand. I will close the lecture with a simple example. Suppose you are working in a bank. You are at the counter where you have to make a transaction of the cash, money. Suppose you are there put at the counter where there is a check or some requisition which is approved by the officer, you have to pay the cash. Suppose the person who came to receive the cash from you, if he is a person whom you don't like, whom you call your enemy, can you refuse to pay the cash to him? Just a straight example. If you do that, you will be removed immediately from that place. You cannot make your personal motives there. You cannot apply your personal motives or personal things there. Suppose there is a lady whom you like, whom you have loved, is a lover for you. She came. Suppose she has given a requisition to withdraw 100 euros. Because you like her very much, you have paid 500 euros, you will be taken away from that and you will be put in the prison. Can you do that? This is so simple. This is this is exactly the deeds which you bind you, the deeds which you are not bind you, this makes the difference. See that. All the impersonal things will not bind you, all the personal things will bind you. You are answerable for that. This you have to remember. Now we will continue our next class. Thank you all. Swasti prajabhyah paripalayantam nyayena margena mahim mahisha gobrahmanebhyah subhamastu nityam loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. లోకాः సమస్తాः సుఖినో భవంతు. లోకాः సమస్తాः సుఖినో భవంతు. ఓం శాంతి శాంతి శాంతి. వాసుదేవ.